Greetings, beloveds. This is Amy Caryn Johnson, the Earth Channel. I have another message for you from Mother Earth, Gaia, today about healthy forms of anger. And first, a poem. We have all felt the sting of being disregarded or unseen, and the desire to take a big action, to show the world our value, to show the world our power, that our thoughts and feelings have traction. Yet when we do for doing's sake, we can leave scars in our wake, though we were utterly unconscious. And so we must temper our urges to be effectors. To be effectual, we must also be cautious. Last week I spoke about conspiracies and how if we allow ourselves to get dragged down into anger or fear, that those conspiracies have already won. And I really wanted to revisit that concept of anger and unhealthy anger versus healthy anger. And one of the ways that I would like to share about that with you before we get to Gaia's direct message, it has to do with my dog that I adopted last year, almost a year ago. And my realization recently of what he really needs from me. I know that a lot of you are probably animal lovers if you're watching this and you found me. And as an animal lover myself, I know that I always want to choose love and respect towards animals. And yet, in order to fully do that in the way that is needed, we also have to understand the animals and where they're coming from. And that not every animal is different. Not every animal is the same. Every dog even is different. It's not just, most of you know that different dogs have different things going for them and maybe against them as well. So this dog, Newt, is definitely different from my last dog, Jitterbug, in several ways, similar in some ways as well. And I actually got an Akashic record reading from my friend Eileen Stanislav this past week about Newt. And it was quite eye-opening. I'm not going to share it here. It did help me understand him better. But it also actually made me a little afraid of dealing with him. And I had to find a way to reconcile what I had heard and learned with where I needed to go from there with Newt. He is adorable. He's really cute. I love him. He's a great cuddler. And he makes me laugh. He's really fun to play with. He loves playing fetch with the ball. I think he's got some black lab in him as well as some kind of bully breed. Most of the people who know Newt agree that he definitely has some kind of bully breed in him. And I don't really want to get into the specifics of that and what people's guesses are. I really don't think it will help. It's enough to know that there's a bully breed in there. And that with that bully breed, he has obviously inherited some instincts. And some of those were inherited also from a past life of his that I learned about. But humanity and dogs have sort of a joined history in a lot of ways. Dogs have been quote unquote domesticated. We have lived together mostly in harmony, but we had to figure some things out in order to do that, in order to live in harmony. Some understandings with each other. And I was reminded this week about my experience teaching daycare several years ago. I was teaching primarily with 1 to 1.5-year-olds, if I remember correctly. And I learned at that time that a large part of their developing brains are associated with their mouths. And that has to do with, the reason that part of the brain develops first and so prominently has to do with their survival, so that they have that instinct to eat and drink and take in the nourishment that they need. And yet that they choose in their, immaturity to try to experience other parts of the world besides food with their mouths. Excuse me for one moment. And so these kids put all kinds of things into their mouths, all kinds of dirty things, all kinds of things that were definitely not food. And one of the things they did as well was occasionally bite each other. And sometimes that biting came out of what you could tell was a frustration to understand the world and understand social interactions. And out of that frustration, because they couldn't immediately understand, they're just like, let's try this. It wasn't necessarily vindictive, but you could tell there was sometimes some frustration behind it. Other times, it was really just exploring, like, what happens if I bite this person, this girl's arm, or, whatever it was. And they found out that they did get in trouble. But I was actually pretty good at that time at catching that kind of thing before it happened and redirecting it. And so that was ideal. Once they realize that they can redirect that frustration somewhere else that is acceptable, that's, obviously the ideal outcome rather than somebody getting hurt. But what I've had to come to terms with Newt is that I have to get over my fear in some ways. Not really just of being bitten. I was already sort of over that. If you've seen, Caesar Milan, he's been bitten many times before, but he's not afraid of it. He knows how to deal with being bitten. Obviously you have to clean that wound because it could easily get infected. You have to take the proper steps to ensure healing. And obviously he tries to avoid it if he can before it happens. But the fear that I have had, especially this week, in learning a little bit more about Newt and where some of his urges come from, it has more to do with his interactions with other dogs. And I live in a fairly populated area, and it's not possible to completely avoid other dogs. So I have needed to come to terms with how we're going to go out in the world and how can I train him to interact with other dogs in a way that is acceptable and no one is going to get hurt. And so as I was trying to come to terms with that, I actually did read an article just today about why cats in particular, I used to have cats when I was growing up, play with their prey before killing and eating it, assuming they are going to do that. Usually that's what happens. And I learned something new. It's because the act of that it takes to kill that animal is actually a risky thing for a cat, any animal. And I'm sure this is true for dogs too, although it may not be as evident that they play with their prey before making the kill. They need to wear their prey down and make sure that they're just exhausted basically before they go in for the kill, because whatever it is, a rodent, a rabbit, can easily bite the cat and obviously cause an infection, perhaps spread diseases that way. And so by exhausting the prey first, then they're able to more safely make an end to it. So it's not out of a desire to torture, it's just out of their instincts that they have gathered and evolved over millennia to do things in a way that allow them to be safe when they're consuming what they need to eat. So I'm maybe getting off on some tangents here. It just helped me to understand where these instincts and urges come from. I can see in Newt that he has the ability to love, and his primary instincts around love and connection are pretty clearly from that standpoint of a puppy to a mother. He may not have been with his mother for very long, but he now sort of sees me as his mother, at least sometimes when we're at home alone, and that's how he treats me. And so when he's in that place of being tender and cuddling, there's obviously no need for training or dominance. But when we are out there around other dogs and he is acting aggressively, it took me a long time to come around to allowing myself to call it that, because I really didn't want to admit that he had any aggressive tendencies. But he does. And I think they have already been tempered by my training, but they still need more. And so, ironically, as much as I really don't completely like the idea of establishing dominance over any other living being, that is what's needed until we can build trust and an understanding of each other, what's expected, and how not to hurt either myself or any other person or dog. And then the dominance can recede a bit, perhaps, once we have that understanding and trust. May need reminders here and there. It's not a constant thing, is what I'm trying to say. And so when we come up against people who have desires that are against our own, we need to understand what is needed to deal with that properly. It's not an out and out fight, battle right that second to go and confront them and defeat them. That is usually not effective. And in fact, excuse me, clearing some throat chakra stuff again. Talking about this, something not a lot of people talk about. As much as that might be the fantasy of how effectual we are, how powerful we are to just be able to go out and defeat our enemies immediately, there's probably going to be some harm that we are going to do if we decide to do that, even if it comes out of a desire to protect other people, ourselves, and prevent harm from coming to ourselves or others. So I think of Gandhi. Gandhi was obviously a pacifist, nonviolent, and yet so effectual. He looked his enemies in the eyes, in the face of them committing violence against him, harming him, and he refused to respond. Now, I'm not necessarily saying that Gandhi's way of doing things is for everyone, but I just want you to take a moment and acknowledge how powerful that was for him to stand his ground, be who he was, hold his vision for peace and respect, and not sink to their level in terms of violence. Another way of doing this, more along the lines of how I'm having to deal with my dog, has to do with it's almost like defensiveness in some ways. That's doesn't sound like quite the word I'm looking for, but I'm preemptively defending others against my dog, and sometimes myself, because once he gets triggered somehow, he does come and try to take it out on me by jumping on me and by grabbing the leash, and he has even caused me to fall over sometimes. I've gotten a few bruises. but I'm willing to accept that because I do love him, and this is something that we have both chosen to learn in this lifetime. Me to be assertive enough and strong enough to stand up to this, even though sometimes I may fall down, and persevere, basically. And so that's how we can treat other people as well. Even when we know that they are doing harm in some way, it doesn't mean we have to sink to their level. We should be careful that whatever ways we are standing up to them or holding our truths are at that level of that higher truth, not in ways that themselves create harm, cause harm in any way. So I hope that makes sense. I hope that's helpful for me to share that with you. One of the reasons I have a dog in my life, have had dogs in my life before, is to keep me grounded in the history of this reality, the history on Earth of how we have all evolved together, and the ways that we need to transmute those different aspects. So, and the reasons that they came about in the first place, like I was saying with the cat and the reasons that they play with their food, there was a very good reason for that. And is there another higher way to go about that in the future? Obviously, humans have a way of killing animals humanely for food, for the purposes of food. And I know some of you may be vegans or vegetarians and not adhere to those types of things. But you would probably agree that if that kind of thing was going to happen, it's best for it to be done quickly and humanely and not torturing them. And we can do that because we have evolved and created tools and at times weapons in order to do that as humanely and quickly as possible, rather than playing with our food without any danger to ourselves. And so I invite you to think of ways to incorporate those types of boundaries, that kind of healthy anger into your life, into your interactions with other people, and having the patience it takes to understand when the timing is right to be most effectual and to speak your truth in ways that will not interrupt, step on other people, that they will be best heard and that they're most open, others are most open to hearing them. So let's see what Gaia has to add about this subject. I invite you to close your eyes if you'd like and take a few deep breaths. Connect with Gaia with me, Mother Earth. Gaia is asking me to explain that there is value in me sharing with these experiences, in case it was at all puzzling to you, how I incorporate the wisdom that I gain from Gaia into my everyday life. Because it's all well and good to hear these wonderful words of wisdom, but it's even better to understand how they might be put into practice. In particular, Gaia was guiding me earlier today to look at a couple of different hexagrams or gates. Many of you have seen previous videos of mine where I have spoken about human design and how they have overlaid the 64 hexagrams of the I Ching over the zodiac, and I have adjusted that zodiac to be the sidereal as opposed to tropical, which you would typically see with human design. But in particular, Gaia was guiding me to look at the 21st and the 26th hexagrams, or as we call them in human design, gates today, both of which are located in the will center. which is sometimes called the heart in human design. However, I call what human design calls the G center the heart instead. And the will center, I call just that, the will center, or I do also associate it with the solar plexus as well, since it is the seat of power in many ways. And one of the gifts I discovered in the 26th hexagram, in the ways that the I Ching talks about it, is the idea of timing and power. That water, for example, surrenders to its lowest path, the path of least resistance, and yet has the power to carve canyons. And sometimes natural dams occur. You can also take the example of artificial dams, but if water comes into an area and collects, pools in some way, it will just naturally take the time to rise and gather strength in many ways. You could look at it as strength before it finally overtops that natural dam and keeps on flowing from there with more momentum than it would have had otherwise. And so that's how we can naturally listen for and feel for the power and the strength we need when we need it. Don't force anything. When you feel the response building up within you, it might be a good idea just to sit with that for a while. Feel where that's coming from and really feel out whether it's really time to allow that power to express itself. Or maybe it still needs to build a bit. Other times I have experienced where sometimes it feels like it's overtopping before I'm ready to let others see it. And so at those times it's good to find an outlet. Sing some songs, dance, write. Find other ways to express it for a while. Singing is my preferred method. Let it be expressed in ways that are safe. And then come back to it later when it has had time to settle and when you've had time to identify the way to be most efficacious. And as a final closing thought, Gaia would like me to point out a bit more astrology. Here's Newt to give his 2 cents as well. I think he likes this concept. We have 2 real powerhouses, Mars and the Sun. Mars is like the soldier that feels his mission is to go off to war and do battle. And he accepts orders from the general. The Sun is like the general. But also, the Sun understands that no matter what, the sun is going to continue to shine, whether there's war or peace. He does not feel the need to start a war just because he feels that's his mission. He just keeps shining, and he allows the rest of the solar system to find and create the balance. And so I invite you to get in touch with your solar energy. And that's what Gaia wants to invite you to do as well. Don't forget to ground that energy into her, Gaia. She has the balance that is needed. And just remember to shine. Shine even when there are clouds in the way and others may not see you. Sit. Thank you so much for joining me. Namaste, beloveds. Like, subscribe, and click the bell to be notified of future videos. Thank you.